What I'd like to do though is go over some beginner Q&A stuff. So if you guys have questions, please ask away. And if you guys have information that you found, like things that you wish you would have known when you're first starting, that'd be good too. That'd be good too. Those are the two things I'm primarily interested in. What's a good leveling spec? Exclamation mark leveling. That's the spec that I use for leveling, and I highly recommend it. And you know what was so cool? I haven't been watching like a ton of other Diablo streams because I don't want to spoil myself too much. But I did check in on my boy Karn. Karn is a excellent PoE player, and he's also the world first level 100 hardcore. And he played barbarian. He played whirlwind for the push. I went and checked in on his stream to see what he was up to, and he was leveling a new barbarian with my leveling build. I didn't say anything, but I was like, my man. He was using my leveling build on his barbarian. He had the thorns going. He had the Ren going with the flay. He had the 3 shouts and chains. I was like, my man. So I think the leveling build is helping people out. Not that he needs help, but that's cool. It's getting out there. Pretty neat, huh? One of the things that I wish I knew when I was first leveling a barbarian is there are 2 really good rage generation aspects that you can get from the dungeons, right? So you can go to your collections, you can go to Codex of Power, you can go to resource generation, and then there's one that gives you resource when you apply a CC. And I haven't even gotten this one yet, but I got it off a ring. And then there's one where your shout skills generate 2 fury per second while active. If you're playing my leveling build, these 2 are excellent because your bleeds that you apply slow, so you get resource when you apply a bleed, and your rend and your flay and your thorns apply a bleed, so that's all the different sources of rage. And then you have shouts generating 2 fury per second while active, also really big. So getting that kind of stuff is huge for your resources. It makes your life a lot easier. But you can also do that with just in general, just going through and looking for aspects that'd be useful to you. Bleed is not a CC, but in my build, it will be because you have a slow attached to every bleed, and the slow is a CC. But yeah, you need to go in here and get aspect of disobedience as well. It's the codex ones are always the lowest roll possible, but they can help you get a build off the ground, right? So coming in here and seeing what's available and going and target farming those dungeons just to get some basic stuff on your character makes a big difference. So you don't have to run around with just blue or yellow gear all the time. You can actually go and convert all that stuff into good gear, which is important. And you do that by going to the little vendor with like the triangle guy with 3 circles on the points of the triangle. That helps out a lot. But my leveling guide will go over a lot of those basic things, but that's one thing that I did wish I knew. Is like, oh man, I can get my shout from a dungeon. My shout gives me rage thing from a dungeon. That's huge. So that would have been very helpful. Another thing I hear a lot about is weapon swapping for barbarian. People don't know like how to do weapon swap, but you open up your abilities, you go to your skill tree, you go to skill assignment, you go here and you scroll down and you can cycle a weapon. You can choose whether you want it to be dual wield or slashing or auto select. Right now I just have it on 2-hander. That's another thing I think people don't always realize about barbarian is you can actually choose what weapons do what, and it doesn't usually matter that much. While you're leveling, you might want to put it on your one-handers just because they attack faster for your basic attack, which is nice to generate fury. But eventually you'll get like legendaries that give you weapon swap this many times, and then your next attack like fortifies you or overpowers the enemy or grants you berserk. So that's good to have that too. Should I save aspects I'm getting from World Tier 2 legendaries? If they're really well rolled, if it's like when there's like the level range, that's when you can, that's how you know to get a good one. By the way, knowing the rolls on gear, you go to options, you go to gameplay, and you go advanced tooltip information. This will show you the rolls on gear. It'll also show you whether the modifiers are additive or multiplicative. And then you have the tooltip compare. So a lot of modifiers, like damage 2 modifiers, are all kind of the same thing. They're just all adding, not damage to the thing. Whereas certain things like vulnerable or crit damage, those are multiplicative. Those like multiply your damage by a modifier, rather than just adding more. So if you guys are adding, just numbers. So if you guys aren't familiar with that, my sponsor Mobalytics has a very good video on that called like talking about buckets. So they call those buckets of damage. But yeah, stacking just like damage to close, damage to bleeding, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of actually the same thing. So what you want, in my understanding, is the sources of damage, which are strength, and then you can do a damage 2, but you really want vulnerable damage and then crit damage, like crit, yeah. All those are kind of different sources of multiplicative damage rather than just scaling the, like, increasing the flat amount, right? Or just adding to it for another thing. Because you definitely want a source of, like, damage 2, but you don't want to just stack damage 2. You want to have, like, crit, vulnerability, damage 2, and strength probably, like, the best, right? So what's causing vulnerable? So I'm getting vulnerable from a variety of places at this point. Early on, the build was using, like, chain hook to grab everything and vulnerable everything, but now I get vulnerable off of my first attack on anything just from the glyph of exploit. Is this beginner information helpful? There's, like, a lot of things that I've learned that are, like, frequently asked questions that I want to share. So another one of those things is vulnerable and fortify. Those are, like, an offensive and defensive mechanic for you. And those are things that, like, every character is going to want to have. I think every character is going to want to have a source of making the enemy vulnerable, and every character's gonna want to have a source of making themselves fortified, I believe. But how vulnerability works? Vulnerability is just like it's a flat, like 20% damage increase, but you can scale that, right? So basically, it's just a debuff that makes mobs take more damage from you. And then fortify is a mechanic where it's you generate Fortify through various means, whether it's like legendaries or whatever. So when Fortify actually has an effect is when the Fortify value that you have on your character at the moment is like a buff. When that is more than your active HP, you'll see this like kind of armored effect over your health bar. That lets you know that you're fortified. And when you're fortified, you are taking a % less damage, but that number once again can be scaled. So you can have plus Fortify effect on your guy, just like you can have plus vulnerable effect on enemies, right? So those are two mechanics that you want to be aware of and use to make yourself do more damage and take less damage. So you see I have this like armored thing on my health bar right now. That's because I'm fortified. Yeah, those are all some helpful things that I wish I knew when starting Diablo 4. Oh, another question I get is whether I should scrap or sell gear that you don't need, right? I see that all the time. So basically, you are going to need both resources. So you're going to have to do a little bit of both over time. So that's pretty much the main answer. Maybe early on when the gear doesn't sell for very much and you don't really need that much gold, you can just scrap it. But I feel like as soon as you need some gold, you just sell that last batch of gear for the vendor. So I will do both because later in the game you're going to need mats and you're going to need gold. So there's not like one, like this is the best thing to do, and if you do one of them then you're trolling kind of situation there. Fortify also always gives you, right, but you can scale it, right? So I have gems in my gear that give me 3% damage reduction while fortified, and I also have talents that make me take less damage when fortified. So it's not always 10%. You can scale it up, right? But yeah, I apply vulnerable through Flay, I apply vulnerable through like two-handed, just doing damage with it because of my build with my paragons. I have the paragon glyph that gives me applying vulnerable like on everything instantly, the first hit. Do you always shout as soon as it's off CD? So for your shouts, a lot of times you want to use your shouts, like with this ring at least, you want to use your shout when there are a lot of enemies around, but I also have a paragon glyph that gives me the shouts reduce each other's cooldowns. So after casting the shout skill, the active cooldown of every other shout skill is reduced by 1.2 seconds, so that helps me get my shouts up. And shouts are a huge part of this build, as you can tell. Yeah, Mobalytics has great explanations of these too. I'm just trying to go through like a couple like beginner Q&A kind of things. Oh yeah, so here's another thing that I'd like to talk about is leveling. So a lot of people ask like how they should level and like what they should do at different points in their leveling process. And maybe these are all separate videos, but I'd like to talk about it like just quickly. With leveling, basically what I'd recommend, if you don't mind going a little bit more efficiently, you can play the game however you want and you should go on your own adventure. But if you're interested in leveling a little bit more efficiently, my recommendation would be to go to World Tier 1 to start and just blast through the campaign, finish the campaign, go to World Tier 2 immediately, go to the Keystone Dungeon to unlock World Tier 3, and then once you're in World Tier 3, the first thing to do is you're going to be focusing on doing the Tree of Whispers quests, doing your world bosses whenever they spawn, doing your Hell Tides whenever they spawn, but prioritizing getting your first 3 ranks of Reputation done to get that +1 skill point. Then, do Nightmare Dungeons. Once you've done enough Nightmare Dungeons to be doing like level 20s pretty comfortably, that's going to be about the strength level that you need to take on the Tier 3 Capstone Dungeon. to get into World Tier 4. Once you're in World Tier 4, you're doing the same thing. You're doing like a lot of that early game stuff again, which is, you know, going through and finishing off the 4th and 5th ranks of these reps, which I'm still doing. Now, finishing off those reps is not the most efficient leveling. If all you want to do is just blast XP, then you just are going to be spam running and resetting dungeons over and over and over and over. But this is kind of like for, you know, for not giga optimal efficiency, but like getting stuff done and doing different things in the game, because I want to get those Paragon points and stuff. But that's what I recommend. Basically, whenever you get to a new world tier, you're gonna want to kind of do like basic like world content first, just due to the fact that you're gonna be pretty weak. But that's a fun phase of the game though, because you also make a lot of gains pretty quick. But that would be my recommendation. And then once you've gotten that kind of stuff done, then you can hop in the Nightmare dungeons and power up. Yeah, I wouldn't do side quests in your first leveling path. No. First thing, I would leave the side quests for World Tier 3 and 4. Use the side quests to give you gear and experience and renown once you get up to World Tier 3 and then 4. My main question is, when should I change from Chains Ren build to what I'm currently running? So what I'm doing right now is mostly just experimentation. And yesterday I was doing a lot of crafting, and I was too broke to change the Ground Stomp legendary effect that I had on this weapon, so I was like, okay, whatever, I'll just use Ground Stomp. Not because I necessarily recommend it. Chains continues to be good, especially when you have that two-handed weapon that makes chains turn into 5 chains instead of 3. Yeah, that's really good. But chains could still be good as well. But I think one of the main things with chains is when you can apply vulnerable on everything, that's when chains starts to not be as important. But chains is still good for grouping mobs. How do you decide which weapon you're going to use for your skills? Either whichever one does the most damage, or like if you need a weapon swap, I would put your weakest weapon on your weakest attack, right? Like, so your basic attack could be your dual wield, and then your slamming attacks, or for me, like if I was gonna play Death Blow with Ren, I'd probably put Death Blow on my hammer, because if I want to say heavy hit too, you're trying to get as many weapon swaps as possible. But you don't have to swap weapons. This is also a really neat thing to know. You're not gonna necessarily need to do this until a little bit later on with this enchanter. You can reroll the stats on one piece, or one particular thing right here. It costs a lot, but it is a good way to make gear that it has almost good stuff. Like this has vulnerable, it has damage too close, and it has damage over time. So those are all values that don't overlap. Those all scale nicely with each other, but it has damage to crowd control, which is a lower roll than damage to close. So we're gonna reroll that one time. And it gave me a crit chance, which is cool, but it's a very, very low crit chance. Almost as low as it gets, but crit is a very valuable stat, so. Now it costs 1 million gold to reroll it, so maybe I'll just hold on to this for now, but I could actually use this. Only problem is it drops critical strike damage in favor of vulnerable, but vulnerable is good. It's just, this one had a max rolled crit chance, and this one had a min rolled crit chance. We're pretty sad about that. And maybe you just explain it, but I'm trying to figure out what aspect stuff is and how to use it. Okay, so aspects are these legendary effects on gear. Like this thing down here, the little star. After gaining the final bonus from Walking Arsenal key passive, you automatically cast Ground Stomp and gain Fury. And then this one's legendary aspect is reduces the cooldown of Leap by however many seconds per enemy hit up to a maximum of 9. So what you can do is you can pull these aspects off of gear and apply it to a new piece of gear one time. So if you're like, I like this ring's aspect, but I don't care about its stats, then you destroy the ring but extract the aspect, right? And then you have these aspects that you can then apply to gear. If like I wanted to apply this over this, I could say, okay, well I want to generate Fury instead, and then this item will, instead of having the Ground Stomp thing, it'll have the Fury thing. Similarly, you can apply that to rares and stuff. So if you find a really good rare with all the stats that you want, you just put the new aspect on it. You can also grab your aspects from your codex, which you unlock these from running dungeons. So these are things that might help you just have a build just going, but they always will give you the lowest possible roll of the aspect, so it's better to get it off gear because the gear stuff can roll higher, right? So this is 25% increased armor when it could be like, you know, 50% increased armor, or not, sorry, yeah, 0.25 instead of 0.50. So it's less effective, but at least gets the build going, right? So that was my recommendation before for a barbarian, is at least go get these resource generation ones from the dungeons, because it helps you play your character, right? Resources are like probably one of the most important things for every class, I would imagine, unless for some reason you don't use resources, in which case you don't need it. What gems do you recommend for most category of gear? Okay, so leveling, I put Thorns on. That's a good question. when I was leveling, I put thorns in my gear because I was playing a thorns build. Now I may end up swapping to max life because I found these pants that give me an effect that heals. Any heal beyond 100% life grants you a barrier for up to 48% of my max life. So that's something that's scaling off of max life, right? So I might want to put max life in there, but I still think that late game Fortify damage reduction is still nice, right? Just taking less damage, but I think that plus max life is also really, really good. And then on my weapons, I'm still using dot damage over time, but now that my character is really getting some good crit, really getting some good crit percentage, and has super reliable vulnerability, I can start putting green gems in there where it's crit damage to vulnerable enemies, right? That'd be good. Is there a limited number of times you can apply an aspect? You can apply the aspects from the book, the codex, as many times as you want. You can only pull off and apply an aspect one time. That's how that works. Yeah. What's the point of having two different two-handers and one-handers? Those all affect your stats, basically. That's the big thing. They all give you stats. And you can change which items are used for different abilities, too. But yeah, they basically all affect your stats. So, like, this item is beautiful. It'd be better if it had strength, but it's critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, damage 2, damage while. Pretty cool. That's big. That's big. What are some things that all barbarians must prioritize? Vulnerability. Yeah. Inflict vulnerability. Generate fortify. Find a good way to generate resources, unless you can have a bunch of abilities that don't generate resources. What does overpower mean? It's like, it's an attack that scales with like your HP and your fortify with a low chance, but it hits giga hard. Yeah, giga hard. Core, overall, strength 2. That's good, sort of. We'd like to see vulnerable there, that's mid. 2, 2, 2, strength. Strength, core, vulnerable, 2. Now, this could be something if that slowed rolled. Well, no, that's fine. Oh, we'd rather see crit damage though, huh? This is not bad though. Why do you not want more than 1/2 effect on item? So the way it's been described before is buckets. So each bucket is like a source of amping your damage, and you don't really you want more buckets rather than more things in one bucket. And all the 2 things are in one bucket. So what you want is like main stat, vulnerable, crit damage, and like a 2 or a while. Those are some keywords. My sponsor at Mobalytics made a really good video about that, and I should probably make a video going over that myself. We'll do that at some point. That's the basics though. That's the basics. So you're looking for things like, if it says 2, those are kind of like the same stats. They just kind of add damage on top of each other rather than multiplying damage. Crafting potions, yeah, I think you should always have a potion running. And now end game, you have maxed out potions and you have maxed out materials. So yeah, go ahead and craft potions and try to remember to use those for 5% XP. That's another good tip. Yeah, so that's like the basics of some beginner questions, some things I wish I knew when I was first leveling in Diablo 4. But when there's more Q&A and when there's more fun things to learn, we'll happily make more videos like this. But make sure you guys let me know in the likes and in the comments if you enjoy this style of content. And even better, leave me some things that you guys wish you knew when you're first playing Diablo, or other questions you might have, and we'll answer them in a video like this and crank out some more D4 content. I'm loving this game, can't get enough of it. Pumped to play and post more. Thanks for watching, show the video some love. See you guys next time.